Terrific.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Okay.
Just so we had a little bit of a technical glitch to start with, and
Okay.
so there's an audience of people you can't see who are here with us. On We have about 30 people who have joined us on this forum.
Great.
And
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce you briefly. And have you met Thomas Steininger?
No, I haven't. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, good to see you.
Lovely to meet you.
Yes, very much.
And I'm Elizabeth Diebold, and our dear friend and colleague Ben Levy is helping us with tech. I think you spoke with him when you first came in, Shelley.
Yeah. Hi, Ben.
And so I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then we will today on the Dialogue Lab we will Thomas and I will have a dialogue with Shelley for about an hour. And just so everyone knows, Bayo Akomolafe was not able to make it tonight. His wife and child, and as he calls her, I think his mother-in-law, his other mother, are all very sick, and he's the caretaker for everybody. So he wasn't able to make it tonight.
Yeah. And he said he's very sorry also, because he really was looking forward to meet you, Shelley.
Yeah, another time.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I'll put the two of you in touch, because I think that you do have a lot to share. And so we're going to have a dialogue here for about an hour, maybe about 50 minutes now, and then we'll open it up and ask everyone to turn on their cameras, and then we will have questions, comments, and hopefully a collective dialogue to take the questions further. And then we'll break into breakout groups, and hopefully Shelley's going to give you something to speak about or to engage with, and then you'll be in your dialogue groups until you feel that you've come to an end, and we won't come back together, but there's the Facebook page, Global Dialogue Lab, for you to share your insights from your groups afterwards. So that's our agenda for tonight. And just to introduce you, Shelley, and please add more if I don't give enough. But maybe I should say I am very excited about having you with us, because you engage with activism in a very unique way, and you have been a student of the artist Joseph Beuys, who created something called social sculpture, which is a very non-traditional form of art. It's a way of engaging with human beings together and in an intersubjective, creating intersubjectives through art, but art in the broadest sense. Things and Shelley is really a leader in the social sculpture field, and looking at the relationship between art and social change. What ways can we create spaces through art that open up new possibilities in human consciousness? And Shelley has initiated the Earth Forum and the University of the Trees, which is a lab for new knowledge and an eco-social future. Much of your work really is about finding and giving people the experience of really shifting our relationship with the natural world. And I think that's part of why it's so powerful. You're also co-author of Atlas of the Poetic Continent and Pathways to Ecological Citizenship. And I welcome you very warmly. I found the conversation that we had as a prelude to tonight to be very provocative and I really thought that your idea of the social mycelium in this time where I think many of us who care deeply about the planet, who care deeply about life, human life, but all forms of life on this world that we're in, feel set back or are alarmed at what's happening. Because as I think I said to you in our conversation, it's sort of like we all, that one morning we got up and it's sort of like when mushrooms bloom, where overnight they come up. It's like overnight we found that there was a different social reality that had emerged from the mycelium, had emerged from something that was going on under the surface, and that changes how we, who we are and how we are and where we are in the world. And your question, how do we seed or nurture the social mycelium for the next growth? What would that be? And I understand we're not here to answer questions and to say here we have the answers, but to say, wow, how do we even ask good questions here? What is it that it will take to seed the next turn, the next growth that will take us in a direction that we feel is more healthful, wholeful. So I welcome you to comment, take this further or reframe or as you wish.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. Although when I looked at my topic and the heading of the topic, the social mycelium was the subheading, the heading about care and fear, I first thought, what have I got myself into? What can I really say about this? And then I thought, no, it actually really is my topic. Even today, when I looked at it again, when I was preparing to meet you all, it really is my topic. So I thought I would begin with something that Hannah Arendt said, the wonderful philosopher, where she spoke about when things are too hard, when people are really encounter hard times, they immigrate, but they immigrate internally. And I think that's a very interesting image for what's going on Earth at the moment, because there are millions of people. Maybe we haven't seen millions yet, but according to Wangari Maathai, she said a few years ago already, everybody's asleep because the whole planet, there are going to be millions of people on the move, from climate crisis and economic crises that go with it, and all sorts of life crises. And we're beginning to really see those movements now. But the other movement, the parallel movement that's happening, that I think is so dangerous, is the internal migration to nowhere, the internal migration to numbness. And over the years, but particularly now in the last few years and the last decade, I am increasingly convinced that part of the huge work we have to do is this aesthetic work, aesthetic in the sense of opposite to anesthetic. If anesthetic means numbness, what we have to do is we have to find all the ways to enliven being, to enliven ourselves, to enliven our thinking, to re-enliven our relationships. And part of that means going into, really going into what's not working, seeing, exploring what's disconnected, what's not functioning. So to just go for a second, and then I'll maybe you've got something to say back to me. But when you were introducing me, and thank you for the very nice introduction, but I think the point I've been thinking about the social mycelium, I suppose I would not say that what we've woken up to see at the moment is a manifestation of the social mycelium. Because for me, mycelium is the mycelium under the forest floor, everybody might know or not know, but there's this kind of giant living body, like a giant mushroom, that communicates across forest floor to the different areas where there's a lack of water. More water is sent, so that it's this huge, very subtle, very fine field communication system. And what I think we are seeing a manifestation of is not the social mycelium. I think the social mycelium, and we'll talk about that some more later, that we need to try and perceive, that exists already. It can only be a healthy body. And there is a very enormous, huge, healthy social body that exists already, parallel to all these very diseased and disturbed manifestations that we're seeing. And I think what we're seeing is not at all the whole Trump world, as you called it the other day when we were speaking. It's a good shorthand for all the things that are not in relation to, not in relatedness. They're all the illnesses, all the diseases that would be like in a forest, seeing all sorts of malformations through distorted actions, distorted activities. So the social mycelium, which I hope we can come to think about and dwell on a bit later, is I don't think what we're seeing manifest has anything to do with the social mycelium, which is a living, healthy, thriving body that exists now too. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, or if I should go on.
I do have a question, because when Elizabeth told me about your pre-conversation, I got very excited about the whole image of the social mycelium, and just to see that there's something growing in the soil of the forest, that to stay in the image, it needs the right moisture and sun, and all of a sudden it pops out. But it came to me to ask you, why do you think that this mycelium, that obviously we don't see because it's in the soil web, why do you think that it does exist? Because
why does it exist?
You're observing something that is growing, and you're relating to it, and I just would like to know, how do you come to see it this way?
So I think we can all see it. On some levels it's incredibly simple, and that's partly what I hope we can I can encourage or help today. But if you think of the earth, the planet, there's the mineral body of the planet, and there's the plant, this beautiful green mantle of the planet that transfers the sunlight into food. And then there's this and the other living beings that are part of this situation. And then there's this kind of human body with all the human actions and interactions and making sense and not making sense. And if you just look at this big human body, it's almost like another layer around the earth of human intentions and strivings and difficulties and huge mistakes. But in this human activity body are thousands and millions already of people, organizations, groups, initiatives. We can't even count them. I saw a Paul Hawken film once where there was a list of organizations that went on for about 2 or 3 days behind him. And that was about a decade ago. If one can just imagine the myriad people, millions, who are engaged in trying to develop alternatives, who really long for another world, who perhaps are increasingly despairing that another world is possible, but who are still trying, whether it's from bits of alternative education to gardens to Greenpeace to people who set up groups like ours. There are millions of people working together, and who even the people who aren't directly working, I know it from students and young people I meet all over the planet who already behave in other ways to each other, that have decolonized in a way, or begun to decolonize the old forms of control and conquest and colonization, and who are into a world about cooperation and consciousness and care. So I just want to go on for 1 second. I think we mustn't be knocked back and confused by the numbers of people who voted for Brexit or people who voted for Trump, because even if you look there, it was just a minute majority. If it was a majority. In some places, it wasn't even a majority. And today, results came through from an election, a big area near London, where actually people have voted against Brexit, 53%. So there's actually, we've got to be very careful that we don't ignore this giant body of commitment, of compassion, of determination, of working, of new vision, of attempts, of failed attempts, of dialogue that is already existing. I think Boyce would have called it a giant warmth body that's existing around the planet. And I think part of our work is to develop the organs of perception to see this body. And from what I'm describing, in a way, it's not very difficult. It's just we've got to flick our seeing from seeing only the disasters. It doesn't mean not looking at the disasters, because I'm a person whose work is very much recognizing that difficulties are a resource. We have to look into the difficulties as well, but we also have to not forget to see this enormous movement of people on the planet, which will give us confidence. Because what's happening with the Trump world is they are getting increasing confidence as each mini victory or apparent victory happens. They get more confidence, and we're all getting knocked back because we're forgetting our body's not as visible because it hasn't got the global media advertising it. If the global media were every day putting as much communication into saying the millions of initiatives that are happening, I think we'd have a very different perspective. And just what last thing, for me, one of the most amazing initiatives that's happening in the world at the moment is how the indigenous nations, peoples are standing up directly. There's a kind of frontline meeting with corporate, with global capital that there has never been before. Up to now, for the last century and a half since Marx, there's been all sorts of movements and protests and small revolutions, but never before have people across the planet, and I meet them all over in Taiwan, and there are people in South Africa and Australia, and now this obviously Dakota, who are standing directly in the front line in a way that global capital cannot. If global capital can't extract in a way, it can't, it loses a huge part of its power. So I think part of our work in perceiving the social mycelium is to see this huge, passionate, determined, committed work that indigenous peoples are doing all over the planet at this very moment, even the ones that are not in the news, to actually say, no, you cannot destroy the water, you cannot take all the mountains, you cannot poison everything, you cannot destroy our lives, you cannot destroy the forest. So we've got to help these guardians, maybe just by organizing immense financial support. So if I didn't see this global body, I probably would go under. As I listen to the news and see each disaster, some which I can do nothing about, like Syria, which is, it's almost total torment to live with. That when there are some things, unless you're a nurse or a doctor and you join the Red Cross, that was something Boyce said to me when I was going back to South Africa into the, it was really kind of exploding. And he said, why are you going back? You're not a nurse, you're not a doctor. What can you contribute there? So I think, sorry for the long talk, but for me, it's partly about really holding the picture, just like you would in a meditation, learning to hold the picture of all these things that we can't physically see all the time, but maybe we've got to map them. That was one of the proposals I wanted to make today. Maybe we've got to begin to map, not just list, but this enormous body of initiative that's also saying no to global capital, no to the Trump world.
I remember, I mean, this list that you're talking about of all of the nonprofits, Paul Hawkins has said that this is a revolution that has happened, and that there are millions of nonprofits all focused on different ways of making the world a better place, a different place, and that no one is tracking that. And it's in his book Blessed Unrest, I think, that he that he's speaking about that. And I think it's really it's interesting, because I think that we are at a point where those of us who have been part of that kind of work thought that the next turning would be the one that would link these, that would create that world. And I think in some ways that's why I think it's been such a sense of being knocked back. I think in the postmodern spiritual world, there's been 2000, and then there's 2012, and there were all these things about this is going to be the shift where all these things come together in a new way. And I think to realize it's like, oh wow, that there's another wrinkle to this that is happening now. I think has been has taken people aback. And I'd like to say that I think that this new development that you're pointing to is quite extraordinary. The linking together of indigenous people on this planet, and that is a very new linkage across all of the continents. I mean, they've almost been destroyed on this earth, the original peoples, but their stance right now, and as you're saying, no, we're protecting water, we're protecting earth. This is what we're here to do. And I heard from one of Bio's friends, Eric. He's in North Dakota right now, and he said he's starting to understand the Indian proverb, "Today is a good day to die," because there's a kind of commitment that I think that they are making, that is an ultimate commitment. And my sense is that even in our NGOs and so forth, that the piece of the piece that the indigenous people bring of non-separation with nature, which is part of what your work is working toward, is a different ontology, a different epistemology, a non-separation from nature, a recognition of our impact on nature, even as part of the system. That piece of non-separation that they embody, and that is part of their worldview, is something that had to be brought out at this point, because this shift is a shift that I don't think that we had really made on our own.
Yeah. Thomas, what did you think, since you asked me that question, what did you think of my response? And then I'll respond to Elizabeth as well.
One thing when you were talking is, because as you maybe know, that Elizabeth and I and some friends of us, we do this German magazine Evolve, and we also do a little German web radio station called Radio Evolve. And part of what we're doing is just looking out there, who's around. That's in fact how we found out about you. And
wonderful what you're doing. That's part of it. Yeah.
No, but it's wonderful what you're doing, and I have to say this basically every day to other people. So it's amazing when you look around, and that's just a point in case I think that you are making when you open the eyes. And there's also, one has to say now, a technology in place, the internet, where you can connect in a way as we're doing at this very moment right now. You're sitting in London, we're sitting in Frankfurt, where all these kind of connections are made that are not necessarily visible in big media, but are connecting to each other. And I found it also very striking the way you use the word aesthetics. I heard it before, and you mentioned it again, and I think it's worth repeating that, because usually we have a certain understanding of the word aesthetics, and we think, okay, yes, art, beauty, whatever, but you use it in contrast to anesthetics, if this is the right English term.
Or anesthesia.
Anesthesia, meaning numbness. And as I understand you, and as I understand your work, it is basically getting beyond this inner immigration, getting beyond this numbness, and being aware how many ways of aliveness are around us, and in awakening to, if I may say so, mutual aliveness. Something comes aware that I guess is this kind of this body that you are sensing, and but we really have to be aware that we are aware, because then something is really growing in this, and this is kind of how I understand your impulse, and that's kind of what I find exciting about this.
Great. Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on a few things Elizabeth said and you've now said, where I also think the potential for danger, and maybe why we think we've got into a bad situation. I don't think we've got into a bad situation. I think what's manifest is what is. It's just like a boil. It's getting much more visible. And I think the danger is, one of the dangers has been, and it was even in Paul Hawkins' list, that, and it's a danger not of complacency, but of belief that all we've got to do is do a lot, and then the social mycelium exists. It's like a giant network. And actually, I think we haven't even begun to properly connect up all the human goings on, this huge impulse that's in millions of individuals, in organizations, in initiatives. We haven't yet found ways to properly connect it so that it becomes a giant body of will and of strength that can carry it forward. It's still very fragmented. And one of the things that I think is important about that is not just sensing our non-separateness or our collective intelligence or the paradigm shift that all these millions of people perhaps have already understood. It's about how do we understand paradigm shift in practice? How do we actually get down to the habit level? How do we shift how we think? So for me, I've said a lot of things, maybe a bit jumbled at the moment, but I'll try and unpack them. It's not so much about recognizing our non-separation from nature, but through really connecting with the so-called world out there, coming to our senses, which is a phrase I shared with David Abram once, and he loved and I love very much. But this coming to our senses, we actually begin to recognize how we think. And the real paradigm shift for me is that every single human needs to get in there, into this space where we see what we see. In other words, we see the lenses with which we see the world, and that's our thinking. Those are our concepts, our thinking, and that's where we can also shift how we see. We can shift what we think. And perhaps what's happened in this huge big movement, why it hasn't been as strong as it will become and needs to become, this huge body, is it's not conscious enough. It's not actually conscious enough of the concepts it holds on every individual level in every organization. An organization is made up of many, many individuals. An organization, if we just look at that example for a moment, an organization can have aims and agendas. and everybody who works in the NGO or the group subscribes to them. But really the work that has to happen in each individual to really have to live, to have made those shifts in themselves and in practice, is work that we often don't do. So you get people now who actually working in organizations, in big organizations, and he's saying we have to decolonize the minds of the activists that are in the organizations, because although people subscribe to some shared agenda, the actual ways of thinking and behaving and relating maybe haven't all shifted. And that's where you get these giant discrepancies in all the parts of the body, and it's not making a healthy mycelium like the natural one under the forest floor. It can't really join up because it's only joining up like a big network of conscious, rational aims and objectives and intentions. But the real shifts, I think, are just beginning. We are just working on the impulse is there, the impulse for a warm, connected, humane, ecological, something different, something that's not about conquest and control and colonization, but actually it's so unconscious. So I think,
if I may ask you directly, because there's something you seem to point at when you point at there's a paradigm shift in practice that is needed. In particular, when you said we have to come to our senses in be able to think. There's some and also what you called the decolonization of the activist. So that what I see when I hear you speaking, there is this kind of systemic world out there. And even if you try to engage and do something better in the systemic world, we're still part of the systemic world. But there's something in the awakening to our senses, as I hear you, that is a much more fundamental, but also much more down-to-earth shift that we need to make in order to really become part of this different body that you're envisioning. Just to ask you if I hear you right and what you mean, if this is...
Yeah, in a way. And so I think, first of all, I think part of the senses, I work very much with Rudolf Steiner's idea of 12 senses, not of 5 senses. And some of those senses are the social senses, the senses of hearing, of listening, active listening, hearing, of thought, of speech. But the sense, I think, that Steiner spoke about that is most important for our work now into the future is the I sense. And people often think the I sense is this old ego sense that we've got to get rid of so we can become ecocentric, not egocentric. But actually, I think what Steiner meant by the I sense is that sense that I am here. I mean, Martin Buber was talking about it, Paul Ricoeur, number of people, the sense that of the being here that encounters the being of another. And without that, I can't respect the being of another human, of the trees, of the world. So part of my work is to develop and strengthen this I sense, the sense with which I encounter myself, I encounter the other. If I am not there, if I see myself as part of, this is exactly where I think the problem's in, some giant movement, like a wave, like a huge intelligence that's just sweeping through. I don't do the work myself. To be present, to even feel the pain is part of the work, to then recognize what I do with the pain, to notice my actions and reactions. So all the time, each and every human and human groups and human communities actually can build capacity to encounter this world and its mistakes more fully. We've demonized thinking because we think of thinking only of one kind. We think of thinking as linear, logical, one kind of thinking, and we think that we've got to do the opposite of thinking. So people are often thinking we've got to kind of counter thinking with a kind of visceral gut sense of things, and that's not intuition either. So I think often people are putting their capacities away, feeling guilty about being egocentric. They put their I in the background instead of having to work with this being so that I can encounter the other. It means I've also got to work with my thinking, my consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And the University of the Trees, therefore, is not really about, it's not an environmental project or a nature project. It's not just about planting trees. It's about encountering the world so that we can encounter ourselves, we can encounter how we think, and we can begin to make those shifts in our thinking as part of our aesthetic work, as part of our enlivened work away from numbness. We can start to encounter how we think through our being in the world. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes. No, I think I think part of what's powerful about what you're saying is that you're you're saying that a lot of the ways that I think that it has an enormous critique within it about how we think about making change. Because when you think about making change from this rational, either from a rational perspective of, or by or by being counter to or against or against the violence and reproducing in your own response the action, the thing that you're protesting against or concerned about. You see that ends up being a cycle that ends up perpetrating the things that we're concerned about, actually. Whereas what you're saying is you're talking about a radical owning of the structures of our minds, as well as an opening up to the reality of our interpenetration with everything, and that from that capacity of sensing, of coming to our senses, of being down to earth, as Thomas said, that we enact, we are non-separation. It's not a concept of non-separation. It is and we are in an exploration of aliveness.
Yeah. I just thought as you were speaking now, just in a way echoing what you're saying, but it might be interesting for people who going to participate some more. But what Schiller said in his aesthetic idea of the aesthetic state, or the aesthetic letters on the aesthetic education of the human being, his model, which is really not dissimilar to Joseph Beuys's idea of social sculpture. But what Schiller was saying then, which was a radical idea, although it was already in Eastern teaching, but what Schiller was saying, that we can either react to things with our instincts on the one hand, and the other pole of instincts is with our reasoning, with logic. And Schiller emphasized a third force, he called it. He called these three things forces. And the third force he called Spieltrieb in German, which translates as play in English. But I think play, we can get a very distorted idea of what he was meaning from if we use the word play. And I think what he really meant was this aesthetic sense. It's the sense that enables us to meet, to encounter, to empathize, to embrace, to love. And it's related to play, because when a child plays, or a human being, a grown-up plays creatively, they meet, they encounter the reality that they're exploring. So maybe it's play. But what that emphasis in Schiller is really about our freedom, that we don't have to remain trapped in our automatic behaviors. They're not bad. We're also creatures. We need these instinctual forces. We can reason, which is also a wonderful capacity, but it doesn't serve for everything. And this other capacity, which has to do with our freedom, it has to do with our engagement and our freedom, this aesthetic capacity, this enlivened connected encounter is actually the point where we are free beings and we can then make choices. We're not just driven by our instincts or caught up in a logical momentum through reason. We can actually encounter and empathize and live what needs to be done. And bring it into consciousness. So I think Schiller's very important part, certainly of my work. I think of Boyce's work. There are many other people, for example, my teacher from India, who always said, our first work is to watch our thought and get down to the habit level, learn how to get to that level and see how we can shift our thinking and see how our action shifts when our thinking shifts. I think I've kind of brought these two together and trying to really find new ways, as Thomas said, of coming into practice. And part of that work is just to begin to look, to map, to recognize the myriad levels on which we need retuning, realigning. David Abram talks about a rightful way of relating to the forest. That never mind, most of the relativist thinking is about, even in Buddhism, a lot of people get trapped in a kind of everything's just a point of view and everyone's entitled to a different point of view, you could put it that way. But Buddhism itself, there's the path of two truths, recognizing that we can see with one-eyed vision or two-eyed vision. And in the world of two-eyed vision, there's really work to be done. And we need to map that work. That's why I love what David Abrams says about, there might be all these different perspectives, but actually, when we look at how we behave in relation to the forests or the oceans or each other, we can see what's not rightful existence. And there's huge amounts of work to be done. I listened to Thomas to one of your previous global dialogues, and I was listening to you asking all the time, but aren't certain things calling us? And I think that's a wonderful question. Everything's calling us. We need to develop the organs of perception to hear, as Boyce said, to hear the sound of the suffering in the trees, to hear everything that's not quite right. And there's work for everyone to do, from new green jobs to alternative bits of education, to just how I hold myself every day. My inner attitude is part of my work in this social mycelium.
No, exactly. If you don't mind, I really would like to bring what you are saying into the very conversation that we're having right now.
Great.
Because there are two things I would like to hone into. It's the senses of the eye and the sense of the playing. Because, of course, when we say to be aware that I am, of course I am, and you can have this kind of numb response, of course, what you're talking about. But if you stay with this for a moment and realize what this really means, that here we're having this conversation between the three of us right now, and then we will have the conversation between the 30 of us. And here I am in this conversation. That means something of me, that if I'm not really kind of taken aback by this, I think I don't really hear the message. That I am this, that I can respond to you, which directly leads to the other side, which I understand also Schiller's playfulness. In fact, what we're doing right now, one way to understand is, in the best sense of the word, there's a play opening. Or that you also could call it a dance.
An interplay.
An interplay where all of the time as we're talking, possibilities are opening up, where our conversation can go, meaning shows up that I hear or don't hear. And as we go with this interplay opens up to its own beauty. Basically, it's the beauty of our conversation that's calling us, the beauty in the meaning, the beauty in the understanding of the meaning. But this is both a very direct and in fact also very simple calling of us. all the kind of reasoning to understand it's important, it's part of it, but to really be there at this very moment in this conversation. But this conversation is just one moment of our life. In fact, all our life is the same thing, that where I am really meant by the aliveness of life, me responding to this and being aware there's an interplay opening. Am I answering to what's opening up? In that, there's ongoingly something very unknown opening, but it needs us for it to open up. That's how I understand this kind of movement that you're describing.
Yeah, and I think one more aspect to emphasize, certainly this interplay and the dance, but is that I'm not just present, I'm not just there with you or in this interplay, I'm also aware. I can be aware of my being there at the same time with you. And that's why I sometimes think the word play in English doesn't say what Schiller really meant, because I think Schiller's kind of play involves reflectiveness in the process. And I think this I becomes strengthened when it can see what it sees. So human beings have got this amazing capacity, and it happens actually, it's Goethe knew it very well, it happens in the space of imagination. In fact, even when I look at you and I see you in myself. I see my life in my own inner, what James Hillman called the theatre of memory. So human beings have got this amazing capacity, whilst being in it, to see what we see, which is not a form of alienation. It's actually a place. The next step is from imagination to actually make sense. I mean, we can all do it. Take an image into this inner space, and then we see it again, just like we can see our thoughts in the space. So for me, this encounter, this development and strengthening of the I, partly has to do with will, of being present, of not giving up, but it's also got to do with the space of consciousness and imagination, and where I become free, because I can make choices, because I can see what I see. And if I can see what I see, when I meet you, I can also see how I'm seeing you. I'm not just caught in a kind of organic dance with you. I'm also present, and the more present I am, the more response able I am. That's another thing I've done, is not only look at aesthetic in contrast to numbness or the anesthetic, but to see how responsibility, real responsibility, is about our ability to respond, which comes from coming to our senses and being present, because only then can I feel what you need. Can I feel what the other community needs? Can I feel the pain? And it can stir up in me, it can activate in me this, it can enliven in me, which is this aesthetic response, an aesthetic way of being, and an ability to respond. So,
it's when you're speaking, I'm realizing that you're speaking about this in a very, I think there's in a way about a very profound kind of transparency to self, that because you're not speaking about an awareness in the theater of imagination or whatever Hillman's term was. You're not. It's not simply. It's an opening in which one's experience becomes evident or visible to oneself, but it's not then a kind of preoccupation that takes one away from the immediacy and the aliveness of where we are right now, but that becomes part of the texture of the aliveness between us.
Yeah, I would call it the substance. As you were speaking, I was remembering a few instances where I've worked, one completely on the ground in a village in South Africa with a whole different lot of stakeholders, where BMW is going to build a factory, and there was a whole lot of conflict. And one of the things that happened in the process that I did, which was actually a forerunner to the Earth Forum, was because I lived it myself. I was so astonished when I started working with the group, who were all kind of, what are we doing this for, and what's this going to bring, and what's it going to achieve? And I said very clearly, I've been asked to come here by few of you, and I've got no answers, but I think I've got a way. And they were all, and then one guy said to me, he said, well, we can't do anything here if we don't know that there's going to be an outcome, because this is the new South Africa, and this is outcomes-based South Africa. And then I said, okay, I promise you there'll be an outcome. And I wasn't sure, but I actually did this process, and the process was primarily, in principle, getting every group through a process of active listening to describe their picture of the future of this area where BMW wanted to build a factory, and to not discuss anything, to not disagree or agree, but to try and see the picture of each other. And what was astonishing was partly through this intensity of the active listening and the recognition at the end that actually each different group of people, the church people, the youth group, the traditional healers, the mayor, everybody had a complete different picture, and people's pictures were real concrete things, their attitudes and pictures, and they were shaping what was going to happen. So there's this lived experience of the connection between thinking and doing. You don't have to talk about it in big language. People were living it. But by the end of this 3-hour meeting, people couldn't believe. The one guy, the youth leader, said to me in the end, he said, wow, this is really an outcome. After they'd all just heard, all these pictures were hanging in the room, and really very problematic, because they were, some of them, very contradictory, but everybody realized this was the starting point. And the word I wanted to introduce that relate to what you said about transparency and transparency of the self, and it's also transparency of the selves who make up a group or a position, is you get the sense of substance. And for me, it's a sacrament. It's like, I can use that term, but it's this living substance that we've all generated and engendered, that we can now re-enter. It's something quite tangible, although it's invisible, and it relates very much. I spent years cracking my head on trying to really understand what Joseph Beuys had meant by learning to work with the invisible materials. Because Beuys said the invisible materials of social sculpture, or the real materials of social sculpture, are the invisible materials of speech, discussion, and thought. And for many years, I think lots of people thought, oh, well, all we've got to do is make discussion forums, and we've got to speak, and we've got to think, and that's social sculpture. And then I thought what my teacher from India had said, where he'd said, you actually have to get down to the habit level in this inner space and work with your attitudes and your mental habits and your thoughts as if they were things. But then when I started working in these situations with this invisible aesthetic process, you could say, I realized how this kind of substance was really also part of we engender it when we work together with our will, with our committed engagement, with our thinking, and it's palpable, it's tangible. You sometimes have to point it out to people, look what we've engendered here. And then people can see, gosh, this, and then use Beuys's term about an invisible material. There it is. It's absolutely concrete and real, just like an attitude becomes form. So we are working with our attitudes, our values, our questions, and they really are materials. And we're shaping a new sculpture. We're shaping a new body. That's where the Beuys's whole idea of social plastic, social sculpture comes in. It's not fixed, but we've got to get in there. We've got to get into this space, which is the space where we form concepts from our lived experience, and we've got to change, shift our lenses, look at the lenses we've got, communicate, discuss with others. Again, Beuys's idea of the permanent conference, keep on exploring, discussing, and not go under, not let our energy go down, because after all, this is the work to do. We've got bodies, we're on earth, and for me the bodhisattva vow is incredibly important. As long as there's one suffering being, all beings, as long as one being is suffering, I should never turn away. So maybe that's a nice place to
invite everyone,
bring in the other people.
Yeah,
to open up the conversation to all of us.
Yeah,
and maybe also to ask everyone to switch on the camera so that we can see each other. There's the first people coming on.
Hello.
So you see a camera icon on the lower left corner. I mean, you just click on this icon. Great to see you all.
How exciting. Hey, fantastic to see you all. A few of you, not all yet.
Yeah. So
hey, Genevieve, I know some of the people. Hey.
Host says stop the video.
Okay.
Would be nice to see you all.
Let me see if we can do that.
Actually, maybe.
Hi, Minu and Darren. Can see people I know. And some of you I can't see yet.
No, they're coming.
What an amazing, wonderful, great technology this is.
You want to let Ben do it?
I just continue.
But okay, so what we would you don't want to let Ben do it? Okay. So what we'd love to do is to really continue the dialogue and continue this conversation. There may be questions that you have, or comments that you would like to make, but let's see if we can try to work this together.
Great.
And so you don't need to raise your hand. It's and keep in mind that we're trying to hold this field here together, and create one conversation if we can, out of inspired by what Shelley has brought to us.
And your questions and your thoughts too. Yeah. Oh, everybody's lighting up. It's amazing. This is like stars. I think that's similar to what happens when people really realize the importance of working with themselves and their thinking as part of their becoming an agent or being an agent of change. We light up like stars. It's a bit like this technology.
Great. So if someone wants to start, I think Diana, you had some. It looks like you were thinking about something.
Yes, I was. I was thinking very much about something that always bothers me, and I loved what you said about demonizing thinking and including the I and the individual and the separation between you and me in the whole. Because when I hear people talk about, we need to reside in a non-dual place, it seems to me that duality has to be contained in that in that the separation has to be contained. And so I wanted to thank you very much that you included the I, which means that somehow separation is also included in the unity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must say it's very much from Boyce and Steiner and my teacher in India, which is interesting, all from different places. but that actually the important to connect, we've got to be present. And to be present, we have to recognize the self and the role of the self and take responsibility for this thinking self, which is not a Cartesian split. It's actually about being present. So, for me, those were all very, it's very important to overcome this negation of thinking and the negation of the individual self.
Yes.
As the basis for building new forms of community and collective, so that we don't have, I think one of the things in the past was we've had 400 or 500 years of the rise of the individual, which has been important, but it became the other of community, the other of collective. And at the same time, in the last few hundred years, we saw the rise of collectivism and the idea of the community, but with the negation of the individual. And that doesn't work either. And now we have to find how to develop new forms of conscious, intentional community on every level, but where the I of each person is alive and as developed and as fulfilled as possible, not as negated. So that's the danger of some of the ideas. I don't think collective intelligence, for example, necessitates that view of the I or the individual, but it can be mistaken. Many kinds of systems thinking can be mistaken to have a sense of this flattening out or denial of the individual needs, wants. And I think that's how things go so wrong. That people can subsume the I or themselves for a time, but then you get, even in organizations with the best radical intentions, individual needs and things burst out. And because there's no body, a living body, I don't mean no person, but there's no understanding that we all have to be growing this self as well at the same time. I mean, Jung called it individuation. In order to be part of a community, then all the conflicts just keep bursting out, or we lose energy. People call it burnout, and the self disappears. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
It calls for incredible responsibility of every individual.
Who's speaking now?
Diana.
It was still late.
Yeah, Diana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to go back to what Shelley's breakdown, you said, Diana, it calls for a tremendous responsibility to break down what the way Shelley was speaking about responsibility. It takes an enormous amount of responsibility to create that new space.
But what's so interesting is it's actually the ability to respond grows as one enters, has the courage to meet the difficulties in oneself, in the world, and to acknowledge one's fears, or to work together with others, or talk and see what one even doesn't know how to do. All this active engagement, this being present, builds this ability to respond, to be present. So instead of, where do I get this, it's going to take an enormous amount of responsibility, which is almost like we've got to push ourselves into it, not quite, but we've got to kind of will it. This is the development of the will forces that enables us to respond. This being present, this entering into, staying alive, to even facing what we don't know, the questions, the answers we don't have, and staying together, not going under, making a commitment to, maybe that's where the hugest amount of what it takes is needed, that we need to make a commitment to not turn away, a commitment to not go under, a commitment to not retreat, at least come together and explore together what we don't know. I'm sure Joanna Macy was talking about similar things in the 70s when she was developing her despair work, really just getting people to engage with what is, and partly that, and to do it together, alone and together. And that's where the strength of will, which enables us to develop this ability to respond through our connectedness, through our coming to our senses. We can't turn away. And not just people like us. I'm interested in working with, and I have worked with, people who started out in processes saying, oh no, this is not for me, or men sitting in suits from a local authority. And, you know, people by the end of a process actually just encountering the earth in a certain region, or what's going on in an organization with their thinking, actually kind of almost being moved to tears because of what they live through lived experience of what's going on, instead of this debating and arguing and staying in our heads. That's the kind of staying in our heads that I think is dangerous. It has to be through some kind of lived experience so that we are moved. It was a beautiful phrase of Bertolt Brecht where he talked about inner mobilization. And I like to use the phrase activating the inner field. So as we encounter even the difficulty, we get moved inside to the point where we are able to respond. We want to respond. It's not a duty from the outside. I think it's a very important way that we have to rethink the whole notion of responsibility.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? Carol, I can mute you from my side, so you are muted now.
Thank you. I very much appreciate what you are just into right now, responsibility, or the term despair work. I'm involved in some refugee work in Germany, and right now I'm in Turkey, and I'd just like to add, or maybe concretize this term despair work with the expression trauma work. I think there's a lot more trauma around than we really can imagine. And I just have to say it's tough. And that really needs, as you were talking about it, about despair work a few moments ago, that really does need a strong commitment. I just wanted to add that to the the practical side of our work.
Thank you.
But the commitment's something tangible, isn't it, Carol? One can, as you enter the field every day, the commitment is, I think that's, again, for people who are interested in Joseph Beuys, but that was part of his notion of warmth work, this enlivened will that gives us enormous energy to carry on, and to carry on, not blindly, but keeping on adjusting, keeping on trying to see how can we work differently on a myriad of levels. Not everyone has the strength to go and work in a situation where there are migrants and refugees. Not everyone has the strength or a particular kind of strength. Some people have the strength to work on one-to-one relationships with people, or with children who have never been out into nature. Everybody's got a different kind of capacity, and it feels like that's also part of our work at the moment, is to try and discover. It's part of our own work, because no one else is going to discover that for us, but to try and discover on what levels, how there might be several, but on what many levels we have agency. We are agents of change, and everybody's different. So we cannot look at what's happening in Syria and what's happening with the migrant people moving and with refugees and think, what can I do? I can do nothing. I'm paralyzed. because actually maybe we are on those levels, but we have agency on other levels, and there are multiple things to be done in the world. We cannot afford to sit back and feel paralyzed. We need to, part of our creative work is to try and unpack, map, identify the myriad levels on which we have agency and where we can make a range of contributions. And I really think that's part of our work, to discover on what levels and in what forms we are agents of change.
And it involves commitment every day.
Every moment, in a way. It's a kind of rededication, isn't it?
Right.
It's like taking people who've come from maybe an Eastern tradition or whatever. It's rededicating yourself. It's like that bodhisattva vow. Every moment again, you have to remind yourself that there's suffering, and that's perhaps part of life, an integral part of life, but there's also unnecessary suffering. It was something I got from a philosopher called Levinas. And the minute you are certain that there's unnecessary suffering on any level, even children sitting in school desks, if you can feel the pain of that and that's your arena, we have to look for our own different arenas instead of actually see this gulf, this chasm, how I'm here, how can I act there? Some people just can't. Some people can. There's someone in this group of people, Darren, who's there with Ninu, and Darren's somebody who's worked as an activist for many years and was involved in Liberate Tate and working with Art Not Oil. And some people can work on these hugely public levels of engagement, and other people's best work. I don't know all of you. I know I can see Genevieve's also there, who's a classical dancer and a philosopher, and who's working with people in India to shift how they think and see through aesthetic experience. And everybody's got their different arenas for working. And I think the main thing we can't do is paralyze ourselves. It's amazing that you can make this commitment and rededication every moment to working in such difficult circumstances. Some people cannot, and we have to, that's part of our work, is also to recognize our different capacities, and maybe they will grow. Maybe in 5 years' time, someone now who can't work in a refugee camp or a migrant camp would be able to, but there are many, many kinds of work to do on earth. So we should rather do the work instead of shipwreck ourselves, because we can't do those extreme kinds of work.
Dudley, you also had raised your hand. I can unmute you from our side. So you should be unmuted.
No.
No, not yet. Let's try again. Oh, he's
Who
frozen.
are you talking to, Thomas?
Dudley.
Dudley, but he seems to be frozen. So maybe Aninai, you also wanted to speak. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Shelley, I'd like to thank you for this beautiful.
Thank you. Just in Mumbai, in India. I've got a very unstable.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can
Yes.
let him go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in
You're breaking up.
a
Dudley.
hotel. I'm in a hotel room in Mumbai, and it's a very unstable connection.
Okay. Maybe if you
Yeah,
switch
that's
off
right.
your video for a moment, maybe then the audio is
Can
stronger.
you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, there.
Yeah.
Can you speak? Dudley, can you turn off your camera? And then just speak?
Then maybe you have a more stable connection for that.
But the connection.
Or Dudley, if the connection is not
Yeah,
strong enough, maybe
I'm in a hotel room.
That's okay.
Yeah, let's try. Can you see?
I'm turning off my video.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Now, okay. Now, I'm in a hotel room in Mumbai, and the connection is very poor.
Right.
It's unstable. What I wanted to share was that this the comments and be more committed. And I think that what helps if people can understand that they're valued and needed by the whole group for being the unique being that they are, having their unique experience, because the only way we can all understand the whole is to know the experience of everyone is valuable. And I think that this would be a help for building responsibility, because people will feel and commit to being able to respond if they really feel that they're valued and that it's important for them. So perhaps this is where we need to put some focus, that encouraging people to see that we all need each other in order to know the whole. And every one of us has a unique understanding and from our unique experience of the world we're having. And it's only that collective experience ultimately that will help us to know the real truth. So, yeah, that's my sharing at the moment.
Mm, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Anina.
Aninai. Okay, I'd like to say, as I was saying, thank you to Shelley for this beautiful picture of the millions of people in thousands of movements doing something to help change the world. That helps me a lot, because it's really very difficult to keep the hope and the calmness with all these pictures being given by the media. And when you were speaking, I really had this beautiful picture of a rainbow with so much sunshine and so much love and compassion. And I had the thought that maybe this is already proof that the world can really be better. This way, the world is already better because of all this love and compassion now existing. I hear of Carol doing this trauma work. It's really a new world now, but just, I should say, it's not visible yet. And maybe the social mycelium is still building up, because as you said, this idea also of the colonization of activists, of each of us, that need to work in our sense of I. I'm reflecting a lot about this. I'm now faced with a very concrete situation in our country. I don't know.
Which country are you in, Anina?
I'm coming from the Philippines. I'm now in Switzerland, but I am a Filipina.
Yeah.
And you might have heard this news about the former dictator Marcos. The family happened to managed to bury, with the blessing of our president now, their father in the Hero Cemetery. And this may sound only very emotional for the family, but it's actually a strategy to go back into power. And I was a victim of this period. I was imprisoned very much, and my ex-husband was almost killed. And I'm witness to many people who were tortured, who were raped. And it's like how it happened before. It is real danger. It's palpable. At the same time, I'm also very much concerned didn't much change in their way of working. And now the cry is again like the cry before Marcos is a tuta. You know, tuta is a small dog, a puppy. And for me, after all these years, all the work on my eye, realized that we are also colonizers. If we make these dictators less human, then we're making ourselves less human. So But at the same time, there's this work of justice. So many people now are saying, why don't you forgive? We just move on. But we know that it's also the reality that because of greed, they can again grab the power and make suffering for so many people. So I'm now in deep reflection how to respond. As you were saying, we all have our own responses. I know I don't like to respond anymore like the old days, to keep fighting and blaming. But at the same time, there's this work of justice that has to be done. He was never brought to court because he died already a few years after the revolution. But the family, he still has all the money and the capacity to go back into power and repeat the same thing. So on one hand, I listen to the voice of our healers, of our Buddhists saying, you focus on the here and now and give love to the situation. But at the same time, there's so much concrete work to do to alleviate the suffering of families who suffered before and the anger. The anger
that is part of the here and now, Anina.
Yeah, exactly. It's part of the here and now.
Part of the here and now, and to recognize the suffering, even if it was 50 years ago, 30 years ago, is still it's part of the here and now. And to do justice and to bring things into the open and to make things conscious is not to say these are our enemies and to engage in battle, but to actually open the things up. It's the same in trauma work. If an individual didn't need to revisit the trauma and open it up, people would just go into the future and go ignore the trauma and leave it behind. And we know that that doesn't happen. So social justice, environmental justice is the same as the kind of psychological justice that we have to do to overcome a trauma. And people need to try and recognize what they've done, at least that it can put an end to that. I think that is part of the here and now. That's where part of the mistakes happen, when people say, let's just concentrate on now and the future. And not, It depends on with what attitude and with what intention you enter the things that have already taken place. I think some things in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it didn't happen properly, but it was a very good idea and initiative. And in part, it began to work, where people needed to actually bring those things into the present instead of push them away, deny them, and put them in the past.
And I think the toughest work, as you said, is the sense of I. For those who are trying to bring the justice, to also realize that there's a sense of injustice if we try to dehumanize those who have committed the injustice. So it's just the same circle again and again. This is the toughest, because many people are angry, cannot see this, and look inside. So thank you for that, this sense of I.
Yeah, because anger also blinds us. We can't, the sense of I is also blinded through anger. So where we are angry, we also have to open that up and discover the things we're angry about, and then work with consciousness. Consciousness doesn't mean putting it away, but we can't be blinded by emotions. We have to recognize the emotions, otherwise they blind things, they blind us. Even fear blinds us. Fear takes away the possibility of exploring our agency, of coming out, of finding how to care, how to be committed, how to so we have to work with these very strong emotions and unpack them and not deny them, and try and see what we see. That's where the conscious eye starts to develop and can make choices. And it's not about negating emotions, but it's not letting them control us, not letting them blind us. So fear becomes something, even our fears can be useful if we enter them and look at them and try and work with them. If we don't, they take us down. They absolutely oppress us.
Right.
Genevieve, have you got something to say? Or Susan wanted to say something.
I just have been thinking as you've been speaking about this wonderful teacher in Los Angeles named, I think his name is Rafe Ellison. He wrote a number of books, one called There Are No Shortcuts. And he has taken this approach to teaching at-risk children Shakespeare. He teaches fifth graders Shakespeare and they perform it. And he talks a lot about personal responsibility and levels of personal responsibility from, you know, we do this because we'll get in trouble if we don't, or we'll get praised if we do. And then the highest level of personal responsibility is we do this because this is what I do. This is who I am. And I think in this climate right now in the US, sorry, I'm on the verge of tears as I'm talking about it, because I've been very affected by the whole election cycle and did a lot of work campaigning for Bernie Sanders and went through disappointment after disappointment. I think there comes a point where there's this feeling of helplessness, especially for those of us. I'm one of the people who's not doing the really big things. I'm doing my small acts of revolution. And that feeling of hopelessness can become really drowning. And if we can really stay with this feeling of, I act on a daily basis in the small ways that I can because this is who I am, not because I think it's even necessarily going to change the tide, but because it's who I am, and it's the integrity, being in integrity with the human experience that's at the center of me. I think there's so much hope that can come from that. Again, not even necessarily hope that something's actually going to change in a major way, but this hopefulness of honoring liveliness, honoring life. And so I just wanted to point people to his writing because it's really fantastic, but also just bring up this idea of, like, we have all these different levels at which we can respond to this feeling of hopelessness.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things to say about it. I don't want to, thank you, but I don't want to take time away, too much more time away from other people, but otherwise I'll come back to that.
Harlan, do you want to respond? Can you open your mic? Can you do that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
And before you speak, and then after this, we'll break into breakout groups. Okay? Yeah.
One thought that's come to me a number of times as we've been listening today is something Luis Mel Madrona said in his book Coyote Healing about the he said that as he was studying healing, he found that it didn't matter oftentimes whether the healing that took place that he was witnessing was something that made sense to him, and he was a medical doctor. But what was needed was, if the person believed that if the story of how the illness was created was aligned with the story of how we're resolving it. And then also the other essential piece was to be held in a community of people who also believed that. And like I've found in my own work as trying to switch paradigms, and I keep finding myself living in these different places where I'm the only one that believes the paradigm is like in need of shifting, and I just is like crushing and like rips the floor from beneath me, and like all the wind from my sails. So like there's this also, perhaps that speaks to the concept of mycelium, but just the need for a network of people holding each other in the belief that the new way is on its way and is necessary. And
Absolutely, and is already there in the just perhaps beneath the surface. And so, I mean, one of the phrases I sometimes use is communities of understanding. We actually have to really actively, what the Trump world is doing is making very visible the communities of shared views and values, because they've got the media with them. And we've got to not just all work on our individual and small and local levels, that's where it's got to happen. But we've also got to find ways to make visible the communities of understanding, of shifts, and we've got to work together. We've got to use these technologies like this. I think this is a really great experiment that Thomas and Elizabeth are putting a lot of energy into getting together. And they, you know, it's got its limitations. We can't actually see and sense each other on another level. And it's very short, and not everyone's going to get a chance to talk and exchange. But it's a beginning of the kinds of, we've got to get enough confidence ourselves. I really think confidence is one of the main resources. As Carol was talking earlier about commitment as a resource, so confidence is a resource. And you can see the guy in Holland, the guy who hopes the right wing will get in, who said recently that what Trump's victory has given the people in Holland so much more confidence, the right wing, to move ahead. We've got to develop the sense of capacity that exists in the alternative movement around the world. People, maybe we have to start as a very concrete activity, a giant mapping, detailing project where we've even got a contact person for every kind of initiative, so that we can see, so that people like you, Harlan, never actually have to, you might feel alone or alien in your immediate environment, but actually right nearby and in this humanosphere, there's so much shared understanding, and we've got to build that, and we've got to be so confident that it actually grows the capacity of this movement that's so global. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. Shelley, do you have anything that you think that it might be interesting for the groups just to continue speaking about or exploring?
Well, I thought one thing you could do, are you going to speak in little groups, or how are you going to talk?
Yeah.
I thought it might really be useful to just to go into this inner space and close your eyes for a couple of minutes and see what images you find, maybe one image each of what's calling you. And maybe a question. Maybe it's a question you find in the space, or it's a question we sometimes say in the work I do, in your rucksack, that you've been carrying in your rucksack. And to just share that with each other, but to not debate it and discuss it, to really, in the beginning, just listen, and listen without agreeing or disagreeing. Just actively listen to each other, and listen as well. Once 3 or 4 of you have spoken, try and listen to what's emerging in the space together. Because part of our work, that's the last thing I'll say, is not just having intentions and planning and finding direction, but is allowing things to emerge and then seeing what collective intention is emerging. What community of understanding, what substance is there. So just again, if you can find an image of something that's calling to you, even if you don't know how to respond, and maybe a question, and just share that, but really listen to each other before you have any discussion. And before the discussion, just try and sense what you could say commonalities, or what kind of substance is emerging together. When you listen into the whole, what's come out of the 3 or 4 of you speaking, what seems to be emerging.
Great. Thank you. Good. So Ben, you'll put people into groups, and I hope many of you can stay. And
we won't come back in the big group, but you have the chance to also share your insights if you want on the Facebook group.
Which is Global Dialogue Lab.
Yeah.
On Facebook.
So, and you can choose yourself how long you want to stay in this small group. So if you want to stay for half an hour, you want to stay an hour, it's up to you. We keep the lines open, so it's your choice how long you can commit or want to be in this group. Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say thank you so much, Elizabeth and Thomas, for inviting me, but also to all of you for being here. And maybe, I think there were about 25 of us, maybe one day there'll be 25,000
Yes.
in such, well, in many such dialogues. I hope you have a great talk, and I'm really sad we can't all talk together. So, bye.
Okay.
Good luck.
Yes, you'll find a group will come up. You'll get a request to join a group.
Me.
Yes. As soon as you say yes to the request, you will
Jump into the
group. So you need to respond to this pop-up window.
Okay. Everybody, bye.
Okay, thanks. And here we go.
Yeah, thank you.
Here we go.
Bye.